Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. So glad that you are here, and I am really excited about what we're talking about today. As Dan and I were going over the content for our conversation today, I found myself telling him I've had this conversation with our leaders in our different disciple making groups and in our church and in our leadership teams. It seems like over and over and over, especially the last few weeks, because the things we're going to talk about today, as we talk today, it's nothing really intellectually going to be new for you, but our hope is that it is a refresher and a new challenge, because this is something that all organizations struggle with, but especially when church people congregate, whether they're in micro churches or they're in traditional churches. This is a challenge that we all face, Dan.
Well, and you guys understand the content, so you don't need more content. The key is, how are we going to move culture forward? We all have things that suck life out of us, right? Every one of us have things that make us want to quit. We get fatigued, and really there's a hamster wheel process. I don't care where you are in your process. Maybe you're, on the elephant to Trojan elephant to rabbit collie continuum. We all are in this process. We overextend our lives, and we learn and know more than we're able to do, and we get really frustrated by that. It's incredibly discouraging, and sometimes you just even want to quit even after you've been doing the right things for a season. And so we're titling this really time together, slow is fast and decentralized is big. Slow is fast. That is, Jesus moved things in a very slow. I mean, when you look at Jesus, most of you and most of your churches would be really frustrated with the speed that Jesus moved things. 30 years to prep. And then even once he started his culture and he was baptized by John, he just goes to a handful of outcast fishermen, follow me, follow me, follow me. And he starts this decentralized culture. And this is not new to you. You guys get this. But look at what happens. We talk about the factory, right? And you can tell what's in the factory by when you roll up the door and you look in the truck, what's in the truck. When Jesus is gone and the disciples are left to themselves in the Holy Spirit and the mission of Jesus without the physical Jesus there, what happens? In Acts 8, it's in your notes there, 8:4, it says the followers scattered and they preached personally about the Logos, Jesus, wherever they went. And then 10 verses later, it says, and when they heard that Samaria had accepted the Logos, Jesus, word of God, they went. And you see this rippling effect of them being content with slow is fast, decentralized is big, and they move out of Jerusalem, and immediately they no longer are in the city where all these amazing things happen. I mean, every denomination has basically set in stone a season where they had it going on. And oftentimes, like if you're Wesleyan, John Wesley was amazing, but the Methodist Church is not on mission with. I mean, it's just a few years later, whatever group you're with, or I mean, I just picked on them for a moment, but because what happens is we get this thing confused, and if we don't get it right, we're going to really struggle.
Yeah, and Dan, I think what I love about this topic is we most of us assume that, well, here I think two things happen. I've seen this when we do an Ignite training, or a leader gets the vision for multiplication. We want it quick. Like, oh, I need this now. I need my culture to get this now. I need, so what is the fastest way that I can get disciple making happen? Or what is the fastest way that I can reach people for Jesus? And then oftentimes, I was sharing with you a story, it even is motivated in the right ways of like a spiritual motivation. So, hell's too hot for us not to be, lightning fast on this. And there's people dying and going to hell and they don't know Jesus. And so we think moving fast is the way. So what is the quickest way that I can get there? But it goes back to the old tortoise and the hare cartoon we've all seen growing up. It's, you're really going to get where you really want to be. The fastest way to get where you really want to be is to be slow. And I've shared this a lot over the years, but the very first ministry book I ever read, probably 20 years ago, was Purpose Driven Church. I've never read anything at all like that. But he makes a great point in there that if you just look at nature, like the way God created nature, the things that grow quickly in nature are weeds and cancer, not necessarily the good things. The oak tree that has deep roots and survives, it takes years and years and years, but to get where you really want to be, that's going to be the process. And then just real quick, the big thing too, we're all part of a culture where regardless of what kind of church you lead, someone finds out you're a pastor, and I bet if your people are like the people I meet, one of the first questions they want to ask you is, how many people come to your church, or how many things do you do? You think about when you meet someone, you talk your high school stories. They'll maybe ask you, how many people did you graduate with? Because the bigger the school, the bigger the opportunity, the more things. And so we carry that into our leadership with us. We need to have a centralized big thing and get there as fast as we can. But what we want to challenge all of us with is to know Jesus did it the opposite way.
And the problem with going the fast version, you think you're going to get there faster, but what happens is you get discouraged. You want to quit. You get sidebarred, you get distracted, and before long, you started an accelerate culture, ... whatever it was, and now you have to admit, it's not really going that great. I mean, if you really were honest, a lot of you guys would say, I tried to go faster than I need to go. I went bigger than I needed to go. I did not decentralize, and I didn't move at the speed of disciple making. And the speed of disciple making is the different kind of speed. And you coach a large network. You see this happening all the time, don't you? That guys, they get in this process and you get discouraged. I mean, you got discouraged at a phase.
I think you have a motivation. You have a motivation when you start off, when you feel like you finally found the reason why all of the frenetic, kinetic energy that hasn't produced what you want, and you just got so much desire, and there's so much passion, and we want to reach the world, and it's like, man, why didn't we had that effort, and we went to that conference, and we saw that one speak, and man, it's blown the doors off their church, and so we came home, and we got to get this going. And so I think this motivation to really, man, let's put this in place and let's get this thing really rolling. And one of the things that we try to encourage the folks that we coach is just simply say, look, anything that happens that's not culture, if it's a program, I think, Rodney mentioned that earlier, it becomes institutional, it becomes programmatic. It's not your culture. And when it's not your culture, which takes a long time to build, is my point. It takes a long time to grow culture. It takes a long time to shift the way people see how they fit into the kingdom, how they fit into the mission, how Jesus has called them to personally embrace the Great Commission and all that. And it takes a long time for those things, for people to truly become disciples and all of that. And that's what creates culture. But once the culture's created, then your potential for rapid reproduction happens. But if you try to institute something quickly, it'll be programmatic because it'll lack culture. I think that's the key takeaway to that.
For me, the thing I love about slow is fast is this, that I know we all know, but Dan, I've just learned when I try to get somewhere as fast as possible, I end up not getting where I really want to be. So, I mean, just like driving down the road, I'm constantly running late places, and I'll be driving as fast as possible to get somewhere. But that's when I end up missing an exit because I was in the passing lane and couldn't get over. I get pulled over because I was breaking the speed limit. Whatever the case might be. I run out of gas because I'm taking up too much gas trying to go so fast. And
you tried to leave the place you were so quick, you left your keys.
You left your keys, you couldn't find it. And so going quick ends up not getting me where I really wanted to get. And I think, my favorite scripture that backs this up, and my staff and my leaders can tell you, we talk about this a lot, is Paul said, run with patience the race. And he's talking about a marathon. And so a mantra for me over the years has been, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So an accelerator comes back and it's like, all of my whys have flamed out and I'm a failure. No, you're not. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Maybe you were trying to get there running a 4-minute mile, but if you try to run a 4-minute mile, you're not going to make it 26 miles. You're going to flame out. I mean, maybe if you're super in shape, some could, but I'm not going to. I need about a 12-minute mile if I'm going to run that far, right? So if I try to go as fast as possible, I don't end up getting where I wanted to get anyway. And I think that's what happens in a lot of us with leadership and culture, and especially multiplication, is I'm just going to turn all of my small groups into X groups. I'm just going to have everybody, I'm going to assign people to, you have these 3 disciples and I'm going to try to force this as fast as possible. And then I look back and I go, I'm not there, or I'm leading a ministry. Maybe it's a student ministry, and I just want to get as many kids in the room as I can and get this ministry there as fast as possible. And then I look back a year later and there's no discipling happening. I didn't actually get where I want to go.
Storm, how many times, as you've been leading our coaching network, have you seen people who get so busy, they have so much going on, they don't have time for sub-coaching. You know, they leave out a huge piece. What usually happens when they get so busy they don't have time for sub-coaching, Storm?
Oh, it happens. Oh, so much of the time, Dan. I can't even over 50%, 60%, 70%, something. And once they start trying to run this race at a sprint, things just start falling apart because they neglect the basics. And we've talked about sub coaching and how central that is. And what that does is it gives support to those who are trying to sprint, and we move them back into the marathon. Because this culture shift for people in their minds and this DNA transfer we're trying to get inside of them takes time. And if they don't have the support, and if we're trying to, one of the questions I often ask the people I'm coaching is, how many people are you trying to disciple?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, because the principle we talk about there is more time with fewer people produces greater results. And do you find that it's hard for them to get that principle?
Oh, absolutely. So, I'm discipling 35 people. Okay, well, how can you invest the time and energy that's needed over 2, 3, 4 years with that many people? You just can't. We lose our minds. So, and it's that slow is the kingdom of God language, right?
It is. But slow is not ineffective. Slow is effective. Jesus was, I would think we would think he was pretty effective. But I mean, how many other leaders can you think of that started a world-changing movement that has lasted 2,000 years? Obviously, you can't, but who only began with 12 people and who spent his entire ministry primarily discipling 12 people. I mean, I can't think of a second person. First of all, no one else has had a movement that's lasted 2,000 plus years, nor has anyone started with 12 people. And now he did have a little larger group of maybe about 100 that surrounded him, but even one other leader would only have 100 in the ranks. I mean, that's not really that he core invested in. And so it brings us to this graphic that we put on your page, and this is just, we know this, but this is just for you to think about. And as you look at that graphic, it just reminds you of some of the critical information we need to think about. And that is this right here, that hopefully you guys, can everybody see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. And so what happens is with this concept, you've got the disciple-driven church, which is decentralized, which is what Jesus did. And it's where movements flow out of that particular approach. So the movement that Jesus started had discipling movement, but this is a key concept to think of when we discuss this, is that it's a movement of God for people. Wouldn't you say that the movement of Jesus was a movement of God for people? But what happens is we almost always go over here on this side where we built this complex church, which is a monument of people for God. And this is seductive. In fact, most people will argue that this is, in fact, I sat in a seminary class one for actually hours, and the professor began the whole course by, who is the church for? And his conclusion was, and he drove us to his conclusion, which professors do, oftentimes not good professors, but is that the church is a monument of people for God. And I fought him the whole way, and I think I passed that course, but because I believe that Jesus gave a movement that comes from God for people. But think about that direction will affect, Rodney, you and I were talking about, so we start talking all the social issues that are going on, and where you land on that will determine almost all of your conclusions.
Yeah, and the other thing that's about this is it's one click away. So here's
so close.
Just to give some examples of how the complex is what most of us are drawn toward. You will hear your leaders say things like, we need to do a men's ministry so that, or a men's event or a men's meeting, so that men will be better husbands and better godly fathers. It's for God that we need to do this for the whatever, and or we need to send all of our people to this conference or this training, or we need to have this thing where it's for God, but it takes all these people, and we're going to push it. In a one click away, I'm going to give you a more practical example. Our student ministry leaders went to a conference. And as we were sharing about that on Monday, one of our leaders said that what encouraged her was, we only had a few students come one night, and I was discouraged. And I heard this lady say, use her example that when there were only 20 kids one night, which we were worried about having only 3, that, well, those are 20 souls. And I said, yes, that's a good point, but let's take it. That's still one click away from where we want our culture to be. We want our culture to be, let's take the 3 number. Yeah, those are 3 souls that are going to spend eternity somewhere. Now that sounds good, right? But that's still a bit of a monument of people for God. Like, we need those 3 kids in our student ministry for God. I said, what if we get one more click, which is, those aren't just 3 souls that are going to spend eternity somewhere. Those are 3 movements. Those are 3 potential ripples that are going to happen. Those are 3 souls that are going to spend eternity somewhere that know 25 other souls that are going to spend eternity somewhere. Let's not stop at just the monument of people for God. Let's go that one more click, which is, let's get each of those 3 students that you have influence over experiencing a movement of God to go impact the people in their lives. And that's a subtle shift. And I'm not criticizing what I shared, but because I think it was, a lot of times these are with pure motives, that we don't want people to spend eternity separated from God, but I want them to go one more click, which is, I want them to not spend eternity separated from God and be used by God so that other people don't. And then they do the same thing. And that's a subtle shift. It's a click, but it becomes categorical versus incremental.
That's a great word. This is a categorical shift, and moving this direction. Yeah, Ken, what were you going to say?
Well, no, I just wanted to add in. I think what Rodney is saying is to me is so crucial. What Rodney is saying tied into, Dan, what you were just talking about, in that Jesus created a movement with so few people. And I was just thinking, Rodney, while you were talking, that the modern North American church, institutional church model is how many apples are on a tree, counting how many apples are on a tree. And the Jesus movement model is how many trees are in an apple. Exactly. And that's such a slower, right? That's just a slower, but capacity takes longer to go. But if you take every apple on an apple tree and you plant as many trees as possible that could be produced from the apples from one season of harvest from one apple tree, you could literally produce an orchard, which like Rodney, you were just saying, one click away. Like, one click away from what? One click away from a movement, one click away from an orchard. And so I just think that the difference between slow is fast, to me, that picture just comes into my head, that it is way slower when you start taking the apples instead of eating them. We're used to just taking the apples and celebrating them and, woo and eating and whatever. But you start taking the apples and invest in them and trying to plant more trees. And like, this is slow. This is so much slower than what we've done. Why are we making this move? And it really is a tragic moment when pastors try to hybridize and say, well, maybe I can live in both worlds.
And Ken, we were in a strategy session this week with 4 of us, and one of our guys said, I have a vision of launching, at the end of my life, having 15,000 trained, multiplying disciples of Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, Kim. I'd never heard him say that, and he can actually show you his mind map of how he's progressing with that vision. Let me ask you, how many pastors in America and yet you might say that guy is actually a loser because he only has X amount of people in his group that he's meeting with right now in Nashville, Tennessee. He's not a loser, but he can show you a mind map of the multiplying disciples that have come from his last 15 to 20 years of ministry, and they're in the thousands. They're moving into the tens of thousands of people.
Yeah,
okay.
And then
it's a different way of thinking.
And what would be tempting about that is, let's take that example, is to say, okay, how do I get to 15,000 as fast as possible? You could create a complex structure that would get 15,000 people signed up for your online webinars, come into your seminary you start, come into your conferences you speak at, and you could take some shortcuts to get to a number, but it's not going to be where you really want to be. But it might take decades and maybe even outlive him to say, I got where I wanted to be, but it was really slow in the beginning. And I think about, like, would I rather have that roast that sits in the crock pot all day long and just simmers and soaks up the flavor, and then it's what I want it to be? Or do I want to throw it in the microwave and just have the same meat, but 4 minutes later, it's not really what I wanted. I got there faster, but it wasn't really what I wanted.
Well, this same guy, he said, and from those 15,000 multiplying disciples, he listed the number of millions of people he believes will come to Christ through that. Millions, not just, But you get 15,000 multiplying leaders. Like Rodney is a multiplying leader. I'm telling you, I don't have 15,000 Rodneys. I just don't. I started thinking about, nor do I have 15,000 Kens, or just go through the list of those of you on Storm and some of you, but it really challenged me to think differently. So here's where we're going to pivot. You all know the Pareto principle, right? And you usually hear it used in the negative version. Like there's 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and 20% of people give 80% of the, and we almost always quote the negative side of the Pareto principle. But someone this week challenged me to think of the positive side of the Pareto principle. I've not thought about this. There is something out there that's going to produce 80% of your effectiveness with 20% of your time. Most of you never thought of the positive side of the Pareto principle. As more and more of us are going co-vocational, we're going to have to find the Pareto principle. There is something that's producing 80% of the effectiveness with 20% of your time, because you're going to spend some time doing other things. Life is going to get more complicated. I mean, you've got a side hustle. Most of you on this call have side hustles. You have other ways of making income other than your church. If you don't find the Pareto principle, you're not going to make it. And I personally think the accelerate process is the answer. I think that we will not beat around the bush. That the process that we do, I think, is the answer. But the question is, you can learn the principles and you can learn all the trainings and still not release the 80% effectiveness with 20% of your time. So how do we do that? That is a key conversation, and it's not. The more we spend time on this red zone complex church, I guarantee you will not be moving in the 80% effectiveness zone. It's only when you move to the decentralized. Now, you intellectually may know that, but this is such a use the word categorical shift. Incrementalism is that I can get incrementally more like this, and this sounds right. And most of the people in your church would agree. We need to build a monument of people for God. It would not be hard for you to convince your people to do that. In fact, they already believe that. That's their core belief. It's going to be harder for you to convince them to live their lives focused on have a movement of God for people. That is going to be in that decentralized shift. This is harder than you think it's going to be. It's going to move slower than you think it will, but it's going to be bigger than you think it is.
Yeah, Dan, I think this is part of the slow is fast and decentralized is big, is understanding that, I think Dan's right. Most of the time we say, if only 20% of our people are involved in discipleship, what if it was the other way around? Well, at the end of the day, a law is a law, and you're not going to buck the trend, right? But maybe Jesus showed us that's what we should do, because as we've talked ad nauseum in this group, Jesus could have taken 80% of the people that he had relationships with and invested with them, but he didn't. He took a very select few and he spent his time with them. And here's an example of where, like, we allow this to be focused on in some contexts. Like Dan and we were talking about football teams and college football. You'll have 85 scholarship players, a handful of walk-ons. You'll have 100 players on your football team.
Dressed in uniform.
Yeah, standing on the sidelines. They go through all the stuff, but only 22 are starters. And what a coach is going to do is that he's going to give those 22 starters 80% of the playing time. I'm going to put all of I'm going to invest the most in my 20%, because you're going to play 80% of the time. You're going to have 80% of the impact. I'm going to backfill with, some guys that play special teams and some backups, but like that quarterback's going to play 100%. And, the wide receivers are going to sub out some. The line's going to play about 80%. Like we celebrate that. So we don't care about who the scrubs are. We just want to know we've got 22 really good players on a football team that can start for us. Well, what if we as leaders and movement makers said, you know what? I'm going to free myself up. Now, I'm not going to spend 100% of my time with those 20% people, because I still want to be looking for other people and caring and investing and developing. But if I free myself up to go, I'm going to find the 20% in my culture that can really be effective and really make a movement and be okay with spending 80% of my time with them. That's going to be a categorical shift, because the challenge is what we're going to be tempted to do is create complex structures to get more people doing things for God, because we think that's going to disciple them. So my church of 100 people, I've only got 20 that are really doing anything. I need to increase that to 40. And then I'll have 40 people doing things for God. That's going to create complex systems versus going, I've got 20 people What if I turned them into 20 people who experience a movement of God and live on mission and ripple out and be okay with that? Because as I was sharing with you, Dan, we've seen ebbs and flows over the years. What happens when I do that? Really, it's actually the best way to see more people connected to the movement, because I can try to do things and it just usually flames out. We're going to do a big event and then only a handful of people come back after that. But when I unleash that 20% to multiply, and they invest in people where they live, work, and play, and they share their story, and life change happens, well, guess what? They're going to want to gather together for worship. They're going to want to gather together to give towards shared causes. And so growth actually comes better through that than my complex attempts to make it happen.
And you were talking about one of your staff members who found this great curriculum material that was probably should be taught, and she wanted to do it with a large group. Let's get these people in this group together. Let's have an event. And you shifted her to say, no. Great. The material is neutral. The material, we should probably do the material. In fact, yes, you're for the material.
Yeah.
However, what if we found a person who would disciple families into making disciples of families? Because it was a discipleship culture, how families disciple their kids. Well, you bought into that.
Sure.
But instead of doing it as a program, what if we take time and actually disciple them through this process and have spiritual conversations?
Yeah,
letting that start some of the conversations.
Right. So what you're hitting on is really how, and this is what fires me up in my passion, how these things impact how we lead, whether you lead a micro church or a mega church or anything in between. And so for me, what I heard was an idea presented. We need to have a parenting conference. This is great content. If we want our parents to disciple their kids, we need to do a parenting conference. And I said, time out. We have 3 of you leaders that are over this ministry. You can take the next 2 months and you 3 will be totally focused on promoting an event, scheduling an event, planning an event, setting up for the event, cleaning up after the event, trying to get people to come to your event, offering childcare and free trips if you come to the event and all the stuff. Or the 3 of you, what if you each identified 8 or 10 disciplable parents in your lives, maybe from the ministry, maybe from the ball fields, maybe from your neighborhoods, and you take the time you would spend on that and you disciple those 8 or 10 parents with this, use the content as the missionary tool. That's the hook. That's the, hey, I want to talk about being better parents. But not only will they leave being better parents, but now they're going to be disciple making and reproducing parents, which would not happen in an event that we would spend way more time on, way more money, way more effort on. So I'm basically trying to tell them, find your 20% and put 80% of your time on that.
And use the spiritual conversation principles. You find the disciplable person, find the, in other words, you use the core elements of what we talk about at every point. You can use different ways to get through this process. You can find ways of identifying people who want to change what they care about, have spiritual conversations, who are green shoot, and then start. There's a lot of ways that you can get to intensifying multiplication, but we have to think differently, which means that we crush the pyramid and we flatten it out so that it's moving in a decentralized fashion. And that was a decentralized illustration.
It was, yeah.
You looked on the bright side and you were very hopeful when you said we end up creating complex systems, hoping that makes disciples. When the truth of the matter is, a lot of attractional churches create a complex systems to get people involved so they stay and become members. It doesn't even really. In many ways, it doesn't have anything to do with them hoping that they become disciples because we create complex systems to get them involved or whatever. It's just trying to link them in here, get them connected here, get them to stay and become members, because the goal is bigness. I mean, just to be on the underbelly of that.
It is for a lot. I think too, though, there are sometimes we think that the bigness is going to result in discipleship. And that the ironic thing is, like what I shared in this conversation with this leader, is that was a centralized approach. We have to be the place that they come. If they're going to be godly parents, it's only going to be if we do it for them. And what I shared with them is that then creates a culture where those that we lead, they can't do anything without us. We're like the helicopter parents. And if you've never read Willow Creek's Reveal study from 20 years ago, they were brutally honest about themselves, that in all the efforts that they made to try to push people to connection and to mission, actually killed it, because they couldn't do mission without the church giving them a mission project. They couldn't do small groups unless the church gave them childcare for small groups. They couldn't invite friends to church or share their story unless the church said we're doing an invite a friend day. And so what I've really challenged our leaders with is, let's not try to centralize. We unintentionally do that when we say we've got to provide the resource, we've got to be this, we've got to be that. how do we take that same goal and decentralize it though, and empower them to be the carriers of that mission? Not you got to come here for us to do it for you.
So what is, I go back and ask the question, what is the 20% of your efforts that's going to produce 80% of your impact? These are the kinds of decisional categorical shifts. I would do one more thing, and then we're going to go into our breakout groups to discuss this. And that is this concept right here that that I want to discuss is oftentimes what we do is we do this right here. We raise the bar on entrance. I mean, how many of our churches say we want to find elders, so we need to follow Paul's prescription for elders, and and Peter's, and so we have this high bar, and so we get these leaders, these men who will step over this high bar, and then what do? We ask them to do 1 hour a month or 1 hour every 2 weeks. And so the centralized church has low responsibility, high entrance, though. You need to study your entire life so you can have the goal of being an elder in our church and do virtually nothing.
Dan, even membership, Ken mentioned membership.
Membership.
You've got to check all these boxes to be a member, but then we're not going to ask you, we're going to we're not going to ask you to find a need in your neighborhood and meet it. We're not going to ask you to share your faith and multiply. We'll do all that for you once you're in.
Attend and tithe, don't hurt yourself. But Jesus had this low entrance bar. All you had to do was be willing to have a spiritual conversation, follow him, engage, trust the Holy Spirit. And those are not small things, but it can happen fairly quickly. And then he gave them the option and the challenge to change the world. Wow, you step across this bar with Jesus, like, okay, we are going to change the world. And you're going to start this ecclesia movement in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the world. Oh, wow. So we want to put you in this group because in your groups, and think about this, because this centralized thing, people are tired and they're bored and they're leaving the church because they're tired of these high entrance, low responsibility, low impact, they want their lives to matter.
Well, Dan, and if they're not tired of it, they finally make it over the bar and then there's nothing there.
What is there? Right.
There's nothing there. It's just, oh, okay. Or they become consumeristic. And I think that's what that really creates is I had to give you my resume to get in. And then once I did, there was low responsibility. So I'm not getting anything out of this. So I go to looking for the next thing to experience or whatever. And I think that's what we mean by entrance is it's really the resume. Like you have to have all of these experiences and qualifications. And then we're so afraid we'll lose you. There's no expectation. But Jesus showed, hey, the qualifications are simple. Follow me. But if you do, you're going to take up your cross. You're going to eat my flesh, drink my blood. You're going to have to let the dead bury the dead. I'm going to have to say, why do you have such little faith? I mean, it's going to be a high expectation.
You're all going to die.
But
a martyr's death. You're going to martyr and share your faith. It's like that wasn't.
But all I expect of you is to follow me, and that's a major difference. Is do we allow people to just follow Jesus and then we cut them loose, or do we say we got to follow Jesus and you got to do this, and this?
So here's my 20% that produces 80% of the impact. What is that? And what triggers me to be protective versus proactive?
And I think we should talk about that for just a second, because what that's hitting on is if we find ourselves being more protective than proactive, we're in that complex zone. Because when we build the complex thing, one of the first things you said, how this has morphed over the years, though, is we talked about you build your Frankenstein, right? Like Frankenstein built a monster that he then had to live with. And I love that. I've thought about that a lot. The first few years of our church, we had a Frankenstein. We built this thing. I thought it was great. And then the monster was controlling me. And I found that the biggest hurdle to changing what I cared about, Dan, was, well, but I've got people I got to pay, got bills and rents that are due. I've got an image. I don't want to do it. And when you're protective, you are not proactive. And so proactive is going to be, how am I looking for ways to unleash people, even if I have to let a campus go, something we had to do. I have to downsize my staff. I have to go a whole different model and do micro churches. I mean, but if I'm being protective, that needs to be a red flag.
And the last question is this, is how can I stay at the margins? I mean, Jesus's church stayed in the margins, as soon as the church hit the mainstream, and Constantine said, if I have to be a Christian, everybody has to be a Christian. We're going to institutionalize this puppy, and we're going to chain the Bible to the pulpits. We're going to systemize everything. I get some of you guys are systems people, right? And you want a system, but following Jesus and his church, the Holy Spirit is who you have to follow, not a system. And that is hard for some of you guys. I get it. But how do we stay in the margins versus the temptation to stay in the mainstream and build this pyramidal thing for God? I mean, there's so many people in your church that want to build the system, and they want this, and they think it's right, but this is so counterintuitive.
Yeah, and Dan, the margins is the 20%, right? I mean, the mainstream's the 80, and a lot of us will think, I need to really focus on that bigger chunk of people. So what can I provide, offer, do, support? When in reality, the impact is going to be in that 20% fringe. Those that you're going to think doesn't have as much impact because there's fewer of them, but that's where the movement is going to take place.
So you got the questions. Tyler, put us in breakout groups, and we'll come back in about 8 minutes. Discuss this pretty thoroughly, if you would, those 3 questions. And what do you think about what we're talking about? Go. Hey guys, well, thanks for being in that breakout room and talking about that content there. I'd love to kind of hear what came out of your group time. Ken, would you kind of just share, maybe you or someone in your group, who was in your group that you want to call on to kind of
How about
review? Or you can do it yourself.
Yeah, Scott.
Sure. So, one of the things that we talked about was just the simple fact that creating more programs and processes to get people involved is really a fruitless effort. And Tony Richards made a great point that, for a long time in his ministry, that was a huge focus, was to try to create places, try to create systems. But one of the things that came out of our conversations really was that having spiritual conversations, the one-on-one discipleship, the sub-coaching, that is really the secret sauce to being able to find those 80%ers within, the 20% that produce the 80%. And without that, you just simply can't really know who's disciplable. And so that's been a key aspect for all of us.
Scott, thank you for sharing that, because I'm telling you, it is the hardest thing to get pastors to start a sub-coaching culture. They want to be the guru, they want to be centralized, and they say, "Oh, I've decentralized." Yeah, but the fact that you won't decentralize and you have to be the guy that everybody goes to means that you are not. You're still totally pyramidal because you won't sort of accelerate culture. So the question I have for you is, as leaders, how much time do you spend leading your sub-coaching culture? Like Storm would say, I spend probably 75 to 80% of my ministry time sub-coaching. Maybe it's 90%. If it's not in that zone, you probably are doing more pyramidal stuff than you would like to admit. So I mean, I just want to just a quick confession moment. How many of you would say you spend at least 50% of your time sub-coaching? If you do, give me a thumbs up. Thumbs up. Good. All right. It needs to be more than that, but that's a start. We'll take that. Okay. I don't want to, but most of you said you spent at least 50% of your time. When I was leading a church that grew to 2,500, I was spending 90% of my time sub-coaching, and 10% of the time was spent doing sermon prep and strategic thinking. 10%. And the church exploded to almost 2,500 people in a short period of time. I don't know how it happened. It just being faithful to lead. Ben, would you care to debrief and just kind of share from your group? You and Jason were together in the same group, weren't you? And you and Jason just want to just share real quick what you guys had.
Yeah, we just looked at the first 2 questions, and I spoke up and I said that, the 80-20 rule is something that's been around a long time. I think every church leader has kind of complained that 20% of the people do 80% of the work.
Right.
And I think
a negative version of it, right?
Yeah, we're kind of talking about the same thing here. the 20% of disciplable people are gathering around them the other 80% of people who are kind of spectators or in different, levels, of involvement or dedication or on the way to being, disciplable. So you got to spend your time focused on the 20, even though we want to protect that 80%. And I mentioned, we're always protecting these big gatherings. Like Jesus, he fed the 5,000, but very shortly after that, he sent the crowds away. And I mentioned that we had this Easter egg drop in our town where somebody spent like tens of thousands of dollars on a helicopter that dropped, thousands of Easter eggs, and they had this giant thing. And I had a bunch of people who were like, man, why aren't we doing that? Look at all those people that were gathered to that thing. But here it is, 3-4 weeks after Easter. Has their churches exploded because of that? No. Matter of fact, I don't even think there was that much of a bump on Easter itself. Mm-hmm. And it's like we're spending our time on the wrong stuff or energy in the wrong place. Again, that 20% that's doing 80% of the work or gathering 80% of the people, if we want to grow that 80%, we got to focus in on those 20 who are working and, keep them, motivated and encouraged. And that's what Jesus did. He had those 12, he had this inner circle. He, had the others that were close by, and that he spent his time focusing there on those people. And that's where the impact really happened.
Hey, Dan,
yeah,
can I comment real quick on that, what Ben just said? Because we actually almost the bulk of our coaching has gone into that Easter context. And then we actually had the same exact thing. We had a church in our area that hired 3 helicopters. And there were people from our church that live around their church and were sending me pictures of the humongous crowds, whatever. And we coached and said, I don't care what your Easter number is. I want to know what I want to know what 4 weeks before Easter and 4 weeks after Easter. That's what I want to know. I don't want to know the Easter anomaly because of, but I think this really needs to be pointed out, Dan, because what he's tying in here, I think is that what causes us to be protective versus proactive. We protect the 80% who see it and see the crowds and being like, man, I don't know if these shifts that we're taking are really doing anything. I mean, we used to have crowds like that now, and I think we start feeling like we sometimes we protect them with that hybridized version. So I just thought that was an amazing comment. I wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. And as a recovering egg drop host of 12 years ago, I can vouch for all of that and say, but I'll say this, it goes back to something that I've become very passionate about, that everything at the end of the day is neutral. The problem is, like when we had an egg drop, same thing, 4,000 or 5,000 people showed up, we had to turn people away, made people mad. There was even a Twitter account, Angry Easter Mom, because she didn't get in. Like, it was the whole thing. All right. What I wish I had known then, though, and we never did it again and never will, but if we had known what we know then, what we know now, instead of it being all about we're just trying to get a bunch of people here to expose them to us and give them an Easter invite, I wish I had even decentralized that. I wish I had known to have people, you're here, so we're going to gather 4,000 people for you to find spiritual conversations. So we're going to invest this time and money, not so we're the coolest thing in town and invite them all to church, but I want to unleash my people to have spiritual conversations. Now, I think a better option of that like we've done is we've taken this principle and we've decentralized it. And we've had people having recovered from it go, when are we going to do it again? We're never going to do it again. Because what we did is we said, we're going to take the same time and resources that we spent on that, and we're going to make it available to you for you to host an egg hunt in your backyard for your neighborhood. And we have had exponentially more conversations, more impact from having 12 or 13 little backyard Easter egg hunts that our people did than we ever dreamed of having from the one that 5,000 people came to. And that's just another example, Dan, of decentralized is bigger. Now, we had fewer people come to those 12 Easter egg hunts, but we had a bigger impact.
Well, because we had about 140 come, 120 or something come to ours, and the spiritual conversations lasted for hour and a half to 2 hours. I mean, I was there almost 2 hours later, still talking to people, and you do the 4,000 drop and they come and go. And the question is, goes back to the final question, how can we stay at the margins when you send it out to the neighborhoods, and I didn't even lead our neighborhood. I mean, I just showed up. I mean, the rest of the people led it. I was just there having spiritual conversations. That's a margin kind of thing. How can we? But you trained in your culture hundreds of people, 100 plus or more spiritual conversationalists, people who are on mission, looking for on mission. That is the fruit of years of discipleship cultivation. You can't start there. Again, if you want to start there, you're going to go big versus it actually is slower, building the culture. And then you're looking for fishing pool events is what we'd call them, so that your people can begin to have opportunities to have spiritual conversations. So you're feeding them those opportunities. You're not providing them. One Life staff did very little other than print some signs and do a little coordination of eggs. I don't want to minimize it, but it was not the big deal. But it puts it at the margins versus in the mainstream. And how many times do our churches keep coming up with mainstream monument ideas? This would be good. Let's do this for God. I mean, I even said to you, Rodney, some of your leaders and some of the leaders in your churches still are doing the monument, and you've been talking decentralization, going out, and they hear what you're saying, and they go, "Oh yeah, I'm doing that. It's no. It's one of the hardest things to get people to pay attention. We're not talking monument here, people. We're talking decentralization. No, we're saying the same thing. Have you ever had someone agree with you, and you're saying 180 degrees the opposite thing, and they go, "We're saying the same thing," and you go, "Okay, I'm going to have to get physical with you." No, we're not. Here's what's different about that. And I'm just pleading with you. And if they can't hear it after a couple of attempts, they're undiscipled.
Yeah, Dan, and I have to throw this in. That's why having people share stories every opportunity you get in your leadership development is so huge. It really is sub-coaching. So my people would tell you every Monday morning, the first thing we do every week is share stories, because it's there that I hear this young lady who's in student ministry share, 3 souls, and it gives me a sub-coaching opportunity to just adjust it and to give it a click. It's where you hear someone say, "I really think we need to do this," and you're able to go, "Well, hold on a second." And that's where you really guard your culture. That's where you really protect, and you really keep pushing people, because we're all going to get sucked to complex, especially those we lead. I've even seen it on a micro church level. Like, we're going to do, birthdays every 2 months, and we're going to have a structure and a system and a strategy for when we celebrate birthdays. I said, whoa. How do we decentralize this thing and not make it complicated? And hearing stories, hearing your people share, your leaders share stories, your staff, that's where you hear, are we really getting this? Because the God thing, Dan, like, we do baptism stories, and that's where I hear, how's the culture going? And our recent baptism stories, as you've heard, have been, people are naturally saying, "I'm getting baptized today because I want to, go public with my faith, and I want other people to know Jesus too." And hearing that almost every week has told me, okay, the it's taking root more. It's getting forward. When I hear those stories and it's, "I'm getting baptized today because I gave my life to Jesus and don't want to go to hell," I'm like, okay, we're missing that click. We got to get back to clicking again. We're close. We're close. But yeah.
So I want to give you your big 3 as we wrap up. Okay, here's your big 3 takeaways to think about. It's easy to slide into complexity, thinking that we're being productive when ... What is it that you would have to say as you think about this? It's easy to step into complexity thinking and thinking that, oh, that's productive. And how many of your people are there? Number 2, you have nothing to prove to others or earn from the Father. Think about this. This conversation is freeing, isn't it? I mean, slow is actually fast. That should set you free. This really isn't about you. If this isn't about Jesus, you have some spiritual reflection to do. This is about Jesus. Decentralized is big, which means, Rodney, you are not the head of the church. Jesus tells us that. He is the head of the church. And you would preach that, but most of us don't act like that. So most people watch our behaviors and think we're the head of the church, the way we act and operate, because we live in the pyramidal structure. And then finally, create a stop doing list and create a called to do. What are you and I called to do? If you can't create a stop doing list, you're not going to create the space to have time and ability to do that 20% that's going to produce 80%. If your sub-coaching, if your accelerate culture is not the main thing you're doing, you are still unknowingly still on the pyramidal side. And that is a acid test for you to think about. Thank you so much for being on this call. I just want to, we're going to be praying for you guys. I just would love to have conversations with you more about this. This is, Ken, thank you for sharing and what you guys, and just thank you guys for all being on the call today. Rodney, thank you for all your input, and we'll see you guys back next month. Next month is our last time together before we take a break for the summer. We'll come back in August, first Thursday of the month. And just also, we're going to send out a save the date for our fall retreat. I'm so looking forward to that. Ken, I know you're probably pumped about the fall retreat too.
Bro,
it's going to be.
I was going to jump in and I was going to interrupt you if you didn't say, let's make sure we make it to the fall retreat. My only concern is that this will be a year of outgrowing a facility that we only got to use 2 years.
I think we're gonna max it out. So when registration opens up, make sure you get your registration because it's going to fill up this year. It's going to be a phenomenal time. It's 3 days in the Great Smoky Mountains, right? And the colors, it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous retreat center. And we'll tell you more about that. It's going to be that first full week there in November. It's coming up pretty quick, 7th, 8th, and 9th. We'll send you a save the date in here a couple of days, but yeah, be putting that on your calendar there for the retreat. And we love you guys. See you guys soon next month. Take care. All right. Did you stop recording, Matt?